everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of our podcast, the Frame by Frame podcast. So, this week we are going to be touching on the topic of essential tools for proficient UX and UI design. And this week's focus is going to be more on the tools for design, collaboration, and presenting ideas to stakeholders and investors. Now, this will be most likely a two-part episode. So the latter of presenting ideas to stakeholders and investors may be in another episode. Probably not next week, because we may actually have a guest who will be talking about Figma animation in Figma. So we're really looking forward to that. But for this week, we can talk about some of the simpler concepts. So we're going to talk about the first thing, which is understanding the UX UI designer's toolkit. Okay, so this part we're going to look at the defining the role of the UX UI designer and why their toolkit is crucial. How do we define the role of the UX or UI designer, and why are their toolkits useful, but also why should they be kept separate?
So that's a really good question because it also plays on what role I think you are. Like if you're motion design or interaction design, you still technically fall in the UX field, but it is also a UX role, so it gets intertwined, I guess. And I think a lot of the jobs we're gonna do, it depends. It's completely dependent on your role. Like in my current position, it's more of a generalist role. Like I have to do more than what somebody else might do, and you have people that are strictly in research or interviews, or they're collecting and analyzing all the data, and then you have the wireframers and architect type designers, and they're going to be more to the UX side of the field. And then it only gets deeper, I think, because even interaction design, you're thinking about what will excite a user to when they click something, or what is a habit building action that they take and they get a reaction from that. So as far as defining roles, I think we'll have to cover more in depth on some roles, but as far as general tools from somebody just getting into the field, I think it's good to know what's out there and what you should maybe look at, because I've had things come up in interviews where I'm like, I never even thought I would need to know how to use that program, or like I didn't think it was important for me. I don't know how you guys feel when you're looking at job listings and stuff.
Well, some of the job listings I see, I find depressing because, I mean, we touched upon this before, but as far as I'm concerned, UX and UI are vastly separate to each other. The toolkits are crucial, so UI should focus more on tools like Figma. But yeah, I would say that the understanding a UX designer's toolkit and understanding a UI designer's toolkit is crucial, and I think this isn't happening, which is why we get jobs that are titled UX UI designer. There's a merge happening, and the problem with that is it distorts what people consider to be a UX designer, what people consider to be a UI designer, and then it ends up just being one whole role.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I do agree, but I also think if you're gonna divide it, then divide it, because they're asking UI people to have a knowledge of UX, and you would think, well, if they're just designing the UI, what's the point?
Exactly.
Like maybe that's how
That's
they
why.
feel. And at the same
Yeah.
time, I think both are important, because if I'm building frames and trying to make pixel perfect designs, I'm also in charge of like, why does a color look that way? How does somebody feel when they're touching that color? And now it is then a blended role because you're doing both. And on the UX side, like, you can be a UX writer, you still have to know how to use Figma then, because you have to put content in. You can't just hand somebody a sheet of paper and be like, here you go.
Right.
Yeah, I made a post on this. A comment on someone made a post about how it's defined. This very question we're addressing on this week's episode, and I ended it off with saying that if you keep UX and UI separate, instead of having one person do both, where the quality, not through any lack of talent or anything, but one person doing UX and UI is, first of all, it's too much pressure for them in the long run. So I say it's short-term gain, long-term pain. But the problem is when you get generalists instead of specialists, you'll find that the quality for both areas falls. So if you get someone doing UX UI, you might find they do a bit of quick research and then they think, oh, I have to design something in Figma, but then they might have to get back to doing an interview with someone who postponed. So I think that actually,
I deal with that at the moment, and I do know there's parts where it's not so much that I can't do the job. I just can't focus directly on one at all times.
yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. It's not that you can't. It's not that you can't do the job or you don't have the knowledge to do the job. It'd be like someone saying, "Hey, you know what? Let's see. Let's think of an example. Um, it would be like someone, trying to um, build a computer where they put in just the basic stuff, program the software. I need more RAM for this. Whereas you could just have someone who builds the computer and then someone who programs the software. That way you get quality in both. But I think the other thing is as well is it's easier. This was also part of the comment I made, is I think it's easier to blend the roles. So a company only has to pay one wage. It's like, oh, okay, we don't need 100% in the UX, we don't need 100% in the UI, 80% will do.
I do agree. I think that is part of some company strategies, but
Yeah, it's just to
I think
save
a lot
money.
of companies are just design immature. Like they either a don't have it in their budget, so they're working with what they got, but they don't understand that they might be burying themselves in design debt that one person can't take care of. Like you're gonna need more people, but if you split, I think that's the fear is if they're splitting roles 10 ways because you have a guy who is a UX designer on his resume, and then when they interview him, well, I really only do the writing. Oh, I really only want to interview people. Oh, I really only do usability testing. Great. Well, I need somebody that can kind of help on both sides.
Hmm.
Yeah,
My role is kind of that, someone who can help in every way. Because again, my role is just help, basically, with this one startup. The CEO only got his first paycheck like last month. That's how
wow.
immature it is. Um, so my resume might say senior UX designer, but it's really just, hey, do whatever you know to do to get the product off the ground in front of the users and actually solving their problems while also solving the problems of the stakeholders. Um, so again, my title might be senior UX, but it's really just do whatever you need to do, whether it's interview on this specific day or this specific week, or dive deep into wireframes and prototypes, or dive deep into like product research and market fit, or even like dive deep into the user logs of what they're actually doing and watching the recordings of user sessions. Just
See,
anything.
I I totally agree with you there, and I feel like at that point it's your responsibility as the UX designer to have time management set aside and make it
Mm-hmm.
very transparent to the people you're working with, because like when I show my boss my Jira tickets and my personal Trello tickets and my notes that I've made in our designs to change stuff, he understands that we have a deadline and we have a roadmap, and there is some give and take that occurs, and he's fine with that. But I know you have other
Hmm.
people who are like, they give you that deadline. They don't work with you on it. They don't plan out a roadmap that's feasible. They do what they want to do for the bottom line. And
Right.
so now that's where they'll be like, we don't need that research. Skip it. Do this. I want to see that.
Mm, yeah. And Will, it's interesting you mentioned the title because I've seen over the years with customer service roles where before it was just customer agent or customer service representative, but
Hmm.
now they use all sorts of titles such as customer service management or something.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, well, customer service management. I think, well, I'm managing the customer services. That means I'm managing a team that that's at the forefront. But no, I've seen a few fancy titles that they give to a job.
Hmm.
Um, and I look at it and I think this is just an ordinary run of the mill job where you're basically doing everything. You're sort of an omni man, so to speak, where you
Yeah.
answer customer queries by email, chat, phone. And I think, why not just keep the title as just a customer agent or customer service representative? It's that's the thing as well. So some of these titles, are fancy, but the work is not fancy at all. It's not glamorous. You're basically just a dog's body.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's going to happen. But I think, especially for juniors or people entering the workforce or even people thinking about UX, UI, yeah, I really think it's important for them to sit down and think about if they would be willing to handle a role like that, or
Mm,
if that's even on their radar. If not, please, like, don't go for that. But if you're a junior and you are into UX, you're kind of into the UI side, you're into the research side, it doesn't matter. If you take a generalist role, in my case, I fell in love with design systems. I find it so interesting. It's the coolest puzzle you could ever work on, and you're building the puzzle to begin with. So everything you create, you have to organize, and you don't know what this thing is, and you have to build it and make it understandable and usable by the people in your company and by anybody who's going to use your design system. And that's a whole nother user experience in itself. And I think if you're entering the workforce and you're not scared of that opportunity, or it's not something you're against completely, take a job like that. You might find something that you never thought would be your niche in UX design. Or you might find that you can't do that type of job and you hate it, and then you go and find a job with a company that is specifically what you know you're interested in the first place.
Right.
yeah. Well, that comes on to the point as well. If I mean, I'm sure this is one thing, one aspect that both UX and UI designers do is sketching and ideation in the fundamental design stage, in the first stage. I'm pretty sure that both do that. I mean, I don't think any UI designer who's a junior or new to the industry or wants to get into the industry is going to jump straight into Figma, even if they're enthusiastic. I think it's a case of, well, I need to sketch a rough idea of how I want this to be designed. So just sketch, a basic wireframe and ideate it.
I shouldn't say everybody. Most UX UI designers will end up sketching. And as far as a toolkit, like, it's great to know how to sketch. Even caveman scratches, like, it's fine. People will understand what they're looking at if they're a designer. And if you're in a team discussing something, they know what they're looking at. Maybe somebody who isn't in that team might not quite grasp it, but it doesn't matter how well you can sketch. You don't need to sketch, masterpieces. It's
Hmm.
a simple
Well, no,
Sharpie sketch
well, no,
works.
that's exactly. I mean, the idea with sketching is just to give a rough idea, enough detail to get people to understand what it is you want to do. And also with a sketch, you get a pen and paper, you scan it onto a system, email it, or you just do some printouts.
Yeah, I think like now everything's digital anyway. Like, I can write in my notebook and send it directly to my phone or computer and turn it into a PDF and email it. So if I'm taking notes, I can
Yeah.
send them right over to somebody who needs them. Um, but again, that's another piece of software you have to learn, or a new set of tools to use, and it's that starts to get beyond sketching. But yeah,
Well, would
I
we
don't
say that sketching is just limited to pencil and paper, or would we
know
say
because not
it's
at all.
yeah, or would we say it's the form? I mean, for example, I remember when I was getting into graphics design, maybe 20 plus something years ago, and I was in touch with a an illustrator. She was really good, um, and she used to use a tablet, not like an iPad tablet, but one where you can sketch as if it's like a notepad or a sketch pad. And I'm thinking, that is also sketching, or even just using FigJam. You get a template and you just sketch some squiggly lines, some boxes, some X's, and that is sketching. It's essentially just a rough version of presenting an idea you have for the final product, for the
Yeah, and
final
even
effect.
even then, FigJam's great. I like it for like creative sessions and brainstorming and working things
Yeah,
out.
I like
I do a
FigJam
lot
for
of
that.
note. I use it for a lot of note taking, or like if I'm getting feedback in my Figma, I'll just copy paste comments that I want to remember as sticky notes in my FigJam.
Yes, the sticky notes are probably, I think, one of the best parts of FigJam.
But I think it's also beneficial. Like I've built a whole UI kit. It's not even a huge kit, but it's something that I can use to make just wireframes, like lo-fi, super scribbly wireframes. It's literally shapes and lines and squiggles that I've made, and I can just drag and drop and get ideas for how things should be laid out and show it to people that need to see it. And so I think it's not strictly pen and paper, but it is good to have that skill. Like if you're in a brainstorming conference, I was just on a trip where we were in a conference room for the whole day, and we had a whiteboard and paper, and those were your options to share your idea. So if you want to do it visually, then at least be able to sketch somehow. It really doesn't
Yeah,
matter if it's stick figures, unless you want to be doing storyboards on the UX side for a company, then you don't have to draw super. Like it's not a thing.
but would graphical storyboards really fall within the scope of UX? Because I mean,
Yeah,
there's
because
one thing.
they fall under like your user journeys and stuff. So if you're doing like user flows and user journeys, it's good to be able to just um, sketch out the flow as a storyboard. Like here's where this person would use this, and it's another way to sell an idea to a stakeholder. Like it explains it a lot better. It gives them some kind of visual in their head, and it helps really show how your idea is working without having to spend all that time on frames in Figma.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can't agree more with that. It's the storyboards. I mean, again, for a UX designer, I wouldn't say that they need to do elaborate storyboards as though they're designing for a game, of course.
No, but again, that's its own avenue in UX design. That's the problem by calling everybody a UX designer. Yes, we are UX
Yeah.
designers, but all of us have a focus, or at least we know what we're interested in. Like I don't mind doing interviews. I actually like talking to people. I like finding out that information. But I don't want to do that day in and day out. Like I don't want that to be my job. Do I have to do it in my
Yeah, you
current
want to
role?
you,
Yeah,
you want
and
a variety. Yeah,
yeah, and as far as like my specific job, like I said, I fell in love with design systems. So at some point in my career, I can see myself moving that direction where that's becomes my focus is like the project management and the design system, and making sure that what we are building maintains what made it successful in the first place. So even if you're updating a system or adding small changes, you're updating your design system, but everything should fit and play by the rules that were initially
Right.
agreed upon. And so, but then you do have people that they like doing the user journeys and the journey maps, and that stuff's cool. Like that's great. If I was really trying to sell something, I would totally design a user journey with a Lord of the Rings hand drawn map, because I actually like doing that. I can do it pretty quick. But it's yeah, stuff like that. Like there's so many areas of focus, and some coincide with each other. Like if you're doing strictly research and interviews, most likely you're going to be involved with usability testing. You didn't have to create it, but you know how it functions. You helped plan it, and you interviewed all the people, and now you're testing that information.
Absolutely, usability testing is. I mean, the office, the company I applied, I had an interview with. Their Bielefeld office is pretty much usability testing and user research. And their other office in Münster is more sort of falling into the design part. Doing the prototypes and stuff. I mean, they do that, I think, in Bielefeld, but it is mainly the U. So they actually have. They don't just have separate UI and UX teams and developer teams, of course. They actually have separate entities within the departments. So again, Bielefeld, it's predominantly usability testing, and then Münster is the place where they do the designs. Yeah, which I think is pretty cool because, like you said, Zach, you get people where they want to do a specific aspect of it, and they'll be really good at it because they have the enthusiasm and they gain more and more knowledge. Whereas some of us, I mean, I'll be honest, I would like, different responsibilities. I'm not saying that, oh, I should be given the same responsibilities as a UI designer when I'm a UX designer because I'm a UX designer predominantly. I know the fundamentals of UI and previous graphics experience does help in a way, but I know that again, I'm predominantly a UX designer, but I'm more than happy to adapt and be versatile in doing all of the different roles of a UX designer, whether it's conducting interviews, whether it's doing the user journeys or making the sitemaps or developing the low mid fidelity wireframes, doing the first prototype.
What did you guys use for your prototypes? Did you use Figma?
Yeah,
Yeah, I used
pretty much only
yeah, I
Figma
used
for me.
Figma.
See, I'm struggling. I hear people talk about Sketch, but I've never personally talked to them, so it starts to make me wonder how many of them really use Sketch, or if they just want to say they do. 'Cause
I did use Sketch. I had it a trial for the 6 months. I did use Sketch, and it's very similar to Figma, but um, there's just something far easier with in terms of collaboration with people. I mean, if you can use Figma, you can pretty much use Sketch, and of course Adobe XD, but that's pointless now because again, as we mentioned last week, that's being made obsolete. I did use for my very first project though, with the language app, I used Marvel.
oh yeah, I
Oh,
use the
cool.
same, and then I
I like Marvel because you can do something very quickly with it. Sort of like
it's a quick iteration, quick test, and you can get
yeah,
either a yes or no on that idea, and then go waste your time. So
yeah. It's really sort of the sketching part of a wireframing app. So yeah, I've used Marvel, used Figma, of course,
I mean,
but I also liked Miro. It's not obviously anywhere near as advanced as the two Marvel and
nah,
Figma,
Mural's
but
another
I
good
really
quick one. Mural's another
yeah,
one.
it's a really good quick one. And it's really interactive as well. I know you can do it on Figma and it's really good, but I think the layout is not as cluttered when you've got lots of people on Miro like it probably could be on Figma.
And
Um,
I've known a few people who use Framer and Envision, and I've never used them. Probably
I've
because
I've touched
I'm
on using InVision before.
see, and it's hard for me once I find a program and get really comfortable. Like Figma, I fell in love with really fast because it was very much like Photoshop meets Adobe Illustrator. Like it was the perfect brainchild for this type of work, and
I
I can see why they Adobe bought Figma instead of having somebody just shut down your product. You know what I mean? Like it was going to happen, so
yeah,
they bought them before it was a problem.
I
But
must admit I hated when I realized I had to start using Figma. I hated it at first. I really did. Like the way. it was set up, what I was trying to achieve, it just didn't seem orthodox. Like, you have to do this, you have to click on this, and then you've got. I mean, I remember before I attended the first webinar for beginner's Figma course, I thought, well, I can't see the grids. Where are they? I've got no option. And then I had to tinker around with it, and I was like, oh, okay, there. Why is it not? But the thing that got me through Figma in term was really I just had to learn where all the functions were. I mean, I knew what the functions did because they're similar to Photoshop. A drop shadow is a drop shadow. Um, Angling a box or any shape is the same. It's just the layout, the interface. But now I'm au fait with Figma. I can design the wireframes. I have designed wireframes. I have designed prototypes, which are on my portfolio. So for me, when it comes to the knowledge of Figma and being versatile, I'm always willing to learn and practice. But I would say, in terms of doing my job as a UX designer, I would say that my Figma knowledge is more than sufficient to be able to fulfill the actual role of a UX designer, not a UX UI designer.
Yeah, and if you're strictly role applying like that, I don't want to be thrown in between two teams. Like if you're applying to Bosch UX team, you're going to be doing strictly UX because they have an entire UI and visual design team. They don't need you to do both jobs. You might get asked once in a while, like, "Hey, can you make a couple quick
Yeah, I mean,
wireframes for us?"
that's fine. If you have to help out, that is absolutely fine. I mean, just in terms of doing it blended full time. Like if someone's short of a UI designer, so you think, well, okay, we've got enough UX designers. Let's get one of them onto doing the UI part just for a little while. But they go back. Then it's absolutely fine. I think it's just more if it's full time blended day in day out. You have to check up on your interviews, but at the same time you're doing something in Figma. It's not a case of not wanting to multitask. Not well, personally speaking, I'm more than happy to multitask, but I just think that some people will be more comfortable, like you said, Zach, doing certain aspects of the particular role that they're fulfilling, be it a UX designer or a UI designer.
Exactly. And no, I mean, it's really hard, like, doing everything by yourself. And if you're not by yourself and you still have teammates, but you're both doing that work, you just got to remember to try to delegate it evenly, where it's like, hey, I have interviews tomorrow. If you want to sit in with me on them, we'll both crack on the Figma next week. And this week we focus on our interviews. And then next week you both work on the UI here and there. And in between, that's when you organize your data. Because currently that's in my role. That's what I did last week is I had a week full of usability testing. And instead of stressing myself out by being like, okay, I got to finish these screens in Figma and I got to work out some flows here and this, I just strictly focused on the usability test and organizing the data so that this week I'm going through that data and then adjusting the designs accordingly. And that's the last thing I will do. So I'm not putting that stress on myself.
Which tools did you use for your usability testing? Was it the standard ones like Optimal Workshop, User Testing, SurveyMonkey?
Actually, it's funny. I mix up our tools. Like I did some on-site testing, and
Oh, okay. So yeah.
so I did some on-site testing, and we just did that with like the present in Figma because it was enough for
Hmm.
what we were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at
But you
some
could see
point,
yourself using the other tools though, right?
yeah, like Xure, I really want to get my hands on, but I won't buy it for myself. Like I'll make my company purchase that for them and I'll get to use it because it's not cheap. Like anybody who's new to UX
No, it's
looking to
expensive.
use it, yeah, anybody who's new, don't even go dipping your toes around there because you're gonna get mad because it's not just
Yeah,
easily accessible.
it's like with balsamic. That's also another equally expensive piece of kit.
Yanixere actually beats balsamic in a lot of ways as far as
Yeah.
all the videos I've watched and things people say. They're like, I mean, if price isn't an or isn't a problem, you would opt for this because it's the most realistic prototype you can show.
Yeah, I've watched videos on Axure, and I think it's great, but I don't have the sponduli to shell out
No, and
on
I think
something
that's
like
where
like
Figma's
Azure.
making
Not yet, anyway.
I think that's where Figma's making a really good push right now, though. That's why they're really focusing on doing variants and variables and style, and they turn styles into variables, which they could still do better because I use Figma token as my
Oh yeah.
I'm tokenizing all my styles so that I can put them on GitHub for my developers, and so they basically have our design system on GitHub. So they have everything they need on GitHub via tokens. They can just click them and get everything for that. Like if it's corners, if it's colors, if it's okay, well that white is not the same white on that button, but when they put it in their code, if that's the only white they have to change in the whole program, they don't have to fish through the whole program to find that code for that specific button because it has a case use name. Like it has a name for when it's used, and they can just use that name in the code to change that color for that specific thing. I should specify instead of being the hex code for every time you used green in your website. Now you have to go back through and you have to reprogram things that you want to stay that green and the things that you don't want to be that green. You have to find them and change that specific thing. And so now, like if a button has a surface color, it says that in our token. It's like this hex code is this color, which is used here as this. And so it's like its own little file naming system. So there's a way to specifically target those things. And that's another great tool to use later on if design systems are your thing, or even if you're new, I would really start looking into variants and tokens for if you're not going to pay for Token Studio, then go into just the Figma tokens, and you can play with the variants and their colors. You can rename them. You can give them multiple names for or aliases for different uses, and it just makes
Hmm.
changing your design globally easier later, especially if you have to go back in and it's like, okay, so testing results this time said that this button on so and so pages where they were used, I don't want to have to go find it. I just change it right there in my variables. And it's like, okay, this variant of this blue is now this name, but that name is this color now.
Yeah. Well, this is what makes the collaboration part really easy. Well, easier. Because Figma is really flexible. I mean, there are what hundreds of different plugins, all for specific purposes. I mean, tokens is I know is the one of the more popular ones
I
for
mean,
the reasons you mentioned.
yeah,
But
plugins
it
have
does make
gotten
collaboration easier. Where, like you said, Zach, you don't have to, a colleague does not have to, or a team member does not have to, fish for certain code or fish for the specific file. They just use the token and they can go directly to that and change it if they need to.
yeah, and if they want to change all of them, they can literally just hit that in the settings for that token. Like, okay, this green is now this blue globally for all surface colors. And it won't change the ones that are attached to another name. Does that make sense? So
Yeah,
it's very
yeah.
targeted. And I think, yeah, just when you start getting that deep into a design, then it's worth having. But
Oh, definitely. It saves time for sure. Uh, I mean, if you can save time, especially if you've got a long project. I mean, a project could be anywhere from something such as a few weeks to several months, maybe even a year or two. It could be just depends exactly on what's trying to be achieved. But this comes to the next point actually that we wanted to discuss in this episode is how do we using all these tools, using all this knowledge and everything else, how do we present these ideas? How do we sell these ideas to stakeholders and investors? And if so, what are the sort of different ways or the different types of stakeholders? I mean, is it that the higher up someone is up the ladder, the less awareness they may have of what's actually being done? And then does that mean that they just want to see, is it going to be profitable? Whereas someone slightly lower down the line is going to think, well, is it going to be profitable? But along with,
So here's
giving a good user experience. So how
here's
would we go about that? Just
that's
for
the
the just
that's
for
the tough one.
the,
So
the topic.
I deal with a couple different style stakeholders. Two specifically, they want to see the designs. They don't really care what's I shouldn't say they don't care what's going on. They keep up on what's going on. But they're fans of like A/B tests. So when you bring them your idea or you
Mm,
bring them a final screen, make sure you have like something you're wrestling with that you would really like to just get their opinion on specifically. So it's like, okay, I'm already torn about this idea and I want this or this. I'm going to share it with these two and see how that's going as far as who likes what. And if they both decide on one, then I'm going to test that one.
Yeah.
yeah. And in your experience, Zach, with what you just said, have you had to have do the stakeholders or investors, first of all, have they heard of these tools? B, if they have, do they actually have any practical knowledge or is it theoretical knowledge? And C, if they do have any actual experience of it, how would that make it where you it can make it harder for you to try and sell them on that idea by saying, hey, this is how we do it in Figma, and they say, well, actually that's not the most effective way. How would we tackle that
So
if we
here's
have
the
to
thing,
present to stakeholders?
they don't care what software you show them something in. They just want something that works. So like if your deadline is to have a prototype ready 3 weeks from now for whatever part of a feature add-on or something they're doing, when you get to showing them, they don't care what program you had to load it up in. They know, like my everybody in my company personally knows Figma. They can go in our Figma, they can leave notes and comments and feedback, and they're no stranger to at least that type of navigation. All of them request that they're never allowed to edit, like they don't want to accidentally do anything in there because they won't be able to fix it, is what they're afraid of. Our owner, I've taken him through FigJam a few times just to show him like what we can do in FigJam, and usually when I'm presenting him with something more numbers based or more deadline based, I'll work up something in FigJam and have a meeting with him in there and be like, look, this is how this should play out, and this is currently what's going on, and because at that point I don't have to show him screens because that's not what it's about. It's about, are we making our deadline, and is everything the way it should be with all the departments then.
Yeah. So when you've presented to these stakeholders, then have you used PowerPoint presentations or Keynote?
So Keynote works the best in my opinion. I don't like PowerPoint, probably because it was almost like not to offend anybody, but I was Catholic growing up, and I am no longer Catholic. That's how I feel. That's how I feel about PowerPoint. Is like I was forced to learn it in seventh grade and eighth grade, and I want nothing to do with it because back then it sucked. It was terrible, but that was my first impression, and it's a lasting one. I will never use PowerPoint again.
Well, you certainly sound like you've got true conviction there in never using PowerPoint. I mean, I can kind of sort of sympathize with that because I remember, well, now, as you know, I'm using 2003 Office Professional, but 2003 nevertheless. And I remember, I think the first, Office suite I used was what was it, 95, 90, Word 98 and PowerPoint, one of those in the late 90s. And I'm using Office 2003 now, and I remember using it when I started college, which for you guys is means university. For us, it's between high school and university. So hopefully, if nothing else, at the end of the podcasts or this season, you guys will be using university for college and not confusing me. Um, but yeah, well, like Oscar Wilde said, oh, we and you Americans, we have a lot in common except for language. So go figure.
No, and,
Yeah,
yeah, so I had to present with Keynote. I've presented with Figma. Usually, if it's like a group stakeholder decision time with our two main stakeholders, the one doesn't care about anything in you've done as long as it's getting done right and you can explain it to him. What he wants to see is how that idea looks when it's gonna be launched. Like, I want to know how this update is gonna look when it hits. Show me that. I don't care about your wireframes because I don't know what that is. Like, you're showing me a stick figure and I wanted the Mona Lisa. Show me the Mona Lisa. And so you'll have stakeholders like that. Like, they don't want to hear the research numbers on why a button is the way it is. They just want to see how it's going to look when it's done and know that you did your job. Like, this should function. This should be relatively easy for people to use. And if something isn't, or something is something he might not like visually, explain to him why that's there. And, you got to then you use your user research. That's when you bring it up with him. Otherwise, that's not the thing.
yeah. Well, it's like in even if you're pitching in business, you get different stakeholders with different positions. I think as I was saying earlier briefly, I think that the stakeholders who are closer in the hierarchy to the people who are actually doing the development side or the research side or the interfacing side, obviously are more connected. So they have more of an idea. But then, having said that, they're not the ones making the decisions whether to invest in this. Is this commercially viable? Is this something that we need? Is there an actual problem that we're not creating?
No, and that's the
Um,
other thing is, like, there's no. I can't tell somebody how they can sell their idea to whoever, because I don't know who this whoever is, and I don't know how well you can story tell, and I don't know how well you thought out your idea, or how much you believe in whatever idea it is you are pitching. Like, that's the most important part. Is it's like, even if I'm making a mistake, I'm convicted. Like, this is my idea. This is why I did it that way. And if there's something that proves it wrong later, I'll happily change it. But until then, this is what the research says. This is what information I have, and this is why it's being designed that way.
Yeah. So, but I think we can all agree on that in order to sell to a stakeholder, I think we need more than just saying, for example, I like this idea. I think it's a good idea, and that's why you should give the go ahead for this idea, right? I think it needs a bit more than that.
Yeah, and let's say from a research perspective, you're gonna explain something to a stakeholder. They like visuals, obviously, like this other guy. So if I have to explain something using data, then I actually I hate Excel. I hate Excel, but I've seen people
Oh,
use
don't
Excel
get me
the
started on
way
Excel.
I've seen people use it the way it should be used, and they make some really beautiful data graphics.
Yep. Yep.
And
They use macros with it. They update the KPIs. There was a guy I worked with, and he was what I would call an Excel geek. And I mean, I'm not exactly a rookie with Excel. I can do pretty much anything up until we get to really advanced formulas and macros and stuff. And as you said, you can have a really visually nice or pleasing, you know, spreadsheet with all of the KPIs, green, the reds, the yellows.
oh, dude,
But
it's
yeah,
just
I,
beyond
I
spreadsheets.
really hate Excel.
This guy had a map of the area where they were doing this test with people, and he had the data broken down into sections on a map, but he was using the data that he had in his spreadsheet to populate those graphs. And so if they
Yeah.
had any questions about his data, it was easy as opening the other window in Excel and being like, well, this is where that data is coming from. This is where that data is coming from. And here's the backup for where all those uh, points were collected. Like, if you ever need to sell it that way, I think it would be a good idea to know how to use Excel. Um, Word program. I mean, I've had to do our research plan. I had to write that up for my last round of research. So I wrote up the plan. I wrote up what we're testing, why we're testing it, the whole thing. Um, but the people I'm presenting it to are, they want to know what they're spending their money on at that point. Like, what is the research we're doing? Why is it happening this way? And can you give me a breakdown of what it is that we're doing so I can read through it and either agree or disagree?
Yeah, well, I think basic and for any job now, basic office knowledge is essential across the board. Word, PowerPoint. I remember I used to when part of of an IT course I did in college, we had to use everything, even Access, and I remember using that. But I found one of the most valuable programs of the Office 365 suite. I find is Visio for creating flow diagrams. It's unbeatable. It's just, I mean, it is designed for that, for doing flow diagrams. And actually, OneNote is also pretty good if you're doing like a blog style, or because I remember we used to use it in Telus. Some of the OneNote, it was a case of doing the minutes for the meetings, and it was really easy and simple and very presentable to any stakeholders. Um, okay, so with that
Um,
said, though,
One thing I would
did you
like
guys have?
to
Yeah,
add
go ahead.
before we wrap it up for the day, I think, probably what we're going to do in a minute here anyway, is that even though we've only covered, a select handful of tools, there's so many out there. And it's really important to just pick the right tool for the job. Like, if you're doing research, you're probably not going to be using Figma a lot. Like, that's not going to be your bread and butter
No,
program.
no, not at
At
all.
one point in research, if your job is to se- sell people on why something should be that way, then I would really focus on programs like Keynote to present and Excel to maybe get you some really good looking graphs to throw on there because people like visuals in Keynote.
And
And
PowerPoint,
yeah, yeah, or PowerPoint.
and PowerPoint,
um, but
and PowerPoint.
what?
Sorry, I'm just saying, I'm just being a bit of a rascal at the minute because
Oh,
I know you said you hate PowerPoint, so
yeah.
I'm thinking, how many times can I throw and PowerPoint after each of your
Oh,
sentences?
it's terrible. But no,
I don't know. I used to create some of the things I could create in Photoshop. I could create in PowerPoint. I used to do that actually for sending presentations to our customers, our stakeholders, the training materials, and all that jazz.
yeah, it's just really important to pick what you can use firstly, but secondly, if there's a better tool or one that's more widely used in your field, learn it. Like, if it's your first time presenting data to somebody, just know that they don't want to see numbers and lots of text. Like, that backfires sometimes because, again, a UX principle, it's overwhelming to your brain. It's just a cognitive overload to stare at a keynote or a PowerPoint slide, and it's just words. Like, no, that's not going to work. I think a lot of times. So
Well, I think the KISS principle works here. The keep it simple, stupid principle. Get a
exactly,
mixture of graphics and text, and just put what you need, to present. It's like the old Occam's razor. Sometimes just go with the simplest way, because if you go with the simplest thing, you can always develop it. Whereas if you go with something that's really developed and you've not explained it on a basic level, it's actually quite hard to go down. Whereas if you're sticking to the absolute basics, you can't go any more basic than basic, right? Um, so yeah, I don't know if you guys had any other closing comments, but I think we actually addressed everything we wanted to address in this week's episode. We've pretty much gone through all of it. Of course, we will talk more in depth about each of the various topics we've mentioned in this episode,
Yeah,
in
and
future episodes, of
I mean,
course.
we have our email now, so if any listeners have specific questions about programs, if I've never used it, I'll straight up tell you. But the best thing I can do is answer information that I do have with the information I do have. But no, ask us questions about tools or maybe even anything about stakeholder presentations or research.
Yeah,
The best, like, do you guys use
or any
Notion?
of the topics we've covered in this week's episode.
Do you guys use Notion?
Yeah, I have done. Yeah.
Nah, I've never touched it. I looked into it once a
Okay,
little
so
bit and was decided, nope, this is too complex. I'm sticking to whatever I
thank
know.
you. Thank you for that. I can't. I cannot.
Yeah,
I've
there,
tried.
there aren't many tools I haven't used, but there are many tools um, I've used in depth. So I've touched upon a lot of them. A download, install, have a quick play around. But Notion, no, I've never really used it in depth.
I've had people
Okay.
swear by it, but within the first 5-10 minutes of using it, I'm like, I don't even know where the learning curve starts right now. So this is not for me. I'm trying to organize
Well, I
my
guess,
life, not make it harder.
yeah. Well, everything's becoming blurred nowadays, right? Everything has to be able, something has to be able to do everything and anything. All right. Well, if you guys haven't got any other closing comments, and I think we'll probably wrap this week's episode up.
I'm
But
good.
again, but we want to stress to those of you who are listening that by all means, please email us not just about this week's episode, but anything we've discussed in the previous episodes. And next week we'll most likely have a special guest who I know will approach the topic that my co-host Zach obsesses over, which is animation in Figma. And it's not the easiest thing to do in Figma, but it's certainly sometimes the most rewarding. So you definitely, especially if you have an interest in animating in Figma and you want to get some tips, do not miss the episode. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap this up now, but thank you very much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you tune into the next podcast. The next podcast episode. And so it's good night from me. It's good night from Zach and Will. Say good night, guys.
Good night.
Good night, Dad.
Yeah, and good night from PowerPoint
Oh,
as
God.
well.
One of these nights or episodes, you guys are going to go to listen to it after it's been uploaded, and I'm going to have inserted the Oscar Awards playoff music at the end of the show.
Yeah.
I like it.
Well, if we're talking about what was it, the Oscars or the Golden Globes that Will Smith
Oh yeah, it
slapped?
was that Oscars? No, that was Golden Globes, wasn't it?
I can't
I
remember,
don't
but
watch
what I'll
either.
do
I
is
have
if
no
you,
idea.
Academy Awards, maybe.
oh, I didn't watch either of them, but it was pretty hard to miss.
Yeah.
Just on Google there was something coming up, but if you do that, if you do something like an Oscars or Golden Globes, I'll send you an animation of a virtual slap.
Nice.
That seems to be the best way for conflict
I'll just steal
resolution.
that. I'll just steal that picture of Will Smith hitting Chris Rock, and I'll put that as our episode picture for the week.
Yeah, if just quickly before we end, there's some genius on YouTube. You know the old I don't know if you'd remember this, Will, but Zach, you should do. You know the old Street Fighter
Oh
2
God, yeah,
intro.
yeah.
Someone made a parody. They replaced the two boxers with Chris Rock and Will Smith.
Oh, that's
And
perfect.
hang on, I'll send you the link on the chat here on Riverside.
I'll make it our next episode's picture then.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll send it to you. This is it. So the intro with the music, and they called it. They renamed it Oscar Fighter. And even by my standards for comedy, I will say that it was genius. But I've just pasted the link in the chat. And actually, for those of you listening at home, just look up on YouTube Will Smith and Chris Rock Street Fighter intro, and you'll find it. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. We're going to wrap up. So again, good night from me. Good night from Zach and Will. And we'll be with you in the next episode. Thank you very much.